Welcome to Snail Story. Today, I want to share with you a story about memory, gratitude, and a love found in the most unexpected place. A young man once raised by a kind-hearted nanny years later. Now a successful CEO, he crosses paths with her. A gone day falls in love with her. Daughter, it's not a story of glamour, but it's warm enough to heal. If you're looking for something gentle amidst all the rush, stay with us until the end, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Snail Story, so we can meet again each week in a story that may be slow, but always true. It was an October afternoon. Autumn winds scattered golden leaves across the sidewalks of Elmridge, a town Liam Blackford would never have set foot in had it not been for a very particular reason. Yet here he was, walking slowly down its quiet streets, surrounded by old bookstores, pottery shops, and the faint scent of cinnamon drifting from a tiny corner bakery. No assistant followed him. No black car waited outside. It was just him, a charcoal wool coat, and a heart quietly aching for something he couldn't quite name. A small wooden sign hanging outside a bookshop made him pause. Wind on the page, book and tea corner, stay for a chapter, or for a cup of tea. A strange little place, a gentle name. Perhaps just a way to pass time while waiting for his delayed flight back to the city. Liam pushed the door open, and the soft chime of a bell rang out, so familiar. It echoed like a voice from long-forgotten memory. Inside was warmth and hush. Like an old quilt, books lined the walls, so many that a sliding ladder was needed to reach the upper shelves. In the corner, a young woman sat behind the counter, writing something in a notebook. Her lightly curled hair was tied low, and her earth-toned cardigan and gray knit scarf made her look like she had stepped out of a classic novel. Liam was about to speak when a familiar voice called from behind a wooden kitchen door. Isabel, don't forget to check the stock, okay? There's a group of students coming tomorrow morning. He froze. That voice, it was the voice that once read the little Flash Prince to him every night. The voice that called his name when he was afraid of thunder. The voice of Clara Bell. A pale blue scarf swayed gently as a woman stepped out from behind the door. When her eyes glanced toward the counter and met his, time stood still. She froze on the spot. The tea tray in her hand nearly slipped. Liam took a step forward, each footfall like walking through his own memories. Liam, she asked, her voice hoarse. It's me, Clara, he replied softly. Her breath caught. One hand gripped the edge of the table. He reached her just in time, steadying her, a reflex. The way she used to shield him when he was a child. The room suddenly felt too small. No one said anything more. Just silence. Just eyes and hundreds of things that had never been spoken. Isabel looked up from her notebook. She stiffened, seeing her mother gaze at the stranger with a mix of fear and emotion. She stepped out from behind the counter, cautious. What's going on, Mom? Clara didn't answer right away. She looked at Liam again, as if to make sure. He wasn't just a figment of memory. This is Liam, son of Mr. and Mrs. Blackford, she said slowly. Isabel frowned. That name, she had heard it once or twice in her mother's old stories. But the CEO of Blackford Medical Innovations? Impossible. Why would someone like him show up in a small-town bookshop like theirs? Liam said nothing. He didn't look at Isabel. He only looked at Clara, the woman he had believed he'd forgotten for years, when in truth, he never really had. I finally found you. Clara sat down in a nearby chair, her hands trembling. Her eyes, once so full of dreams for him, were now etched with time, but they still held the same gentleness. The same quiet love and a sorrow left unspoken. I thought I'd never see you again. Liam slowly shook his head. There are some things that can't be erased, Clara, no matter how hard someone tries to forget. Before he could say more, Isabel cut in, her voice laced with suspicion. Why are you here? For my mother, Clara. gently placed her hand over her daughter's, shaking her head. Then she looked at Liam and spoke softly. "Come back tomorrow afternoon. We need to close the shop." "There's so much that needs to be said." Liam nodded. His heart felt heavy and strangely light at the same time. He hadn't expected that one afternoon could shift his entire world because of one familiar voice. And a woman who had once been his whole childhood. And he had no idea yet how the girl standing was quietly behind that counter with eyes both sharp and guarded would go on to change his life in ways he couldn't imagine. That night, Liam couldn't sleep. The hotel in Elmridge was so quiet he could hear the wind tapping gently against the glass. The room was perfectly comfortable, clean sheets, soft bedding, but something was missing. Something that tugged at his chest ever since the encounter that afternoon. Her name kept echoing in his mind. Clara Bell, the woman he once called Miss. Clara, with all the trust and affection of a little boy starved for parental warmth. Liam was only 6 years old when his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Blackford, hired Clara Bell as his nanny at their lakeside estate. Though technically a nanny, everyone knew she was unlike the ones before her. Clara didn't have a fancy degree, nor came from a prestigious background. But she had something no one else ever did: an endlessly warm heart and infinite patience. The first time he met her, Liam was curled up by the playroom window, clutching a frayed teddy bear. His parents had just left for a 3-week business trip to Europe. A housemaid walked by, dropping off a plate of stale cookies and a cold glass of milk without a word. Clara didn't ask if he was hungry. She just sat beside him quietly. After a while, she handed him a handkerchief and whispered, "If you don't want to talk, I'll stay here until you do." For the first time in years, Liam cried. From that day on, she became his only refuge in that enormous, echoing mansion. Clara taught him how to tie his shoelaces, read him bedtime stories, and made hot cocoa with exactly 3 tiny marshmallows just the way he liked it. Every time his parents didn't come home as promised, she was the one sitting beside the window, waiting with him. No one taught Liam how to express his feelings the way Clara did. No one else held him when he had a fever, or when the kids at school mocked him for having everything but no one to pick him up. Once, Liam accidentally broke an antique vase in the grand living room. The butler threatened to report him to Mrs. Celeste, his mother. But Clara simply looked at him, then sat down to clean the shattered pieces. "There are more important things than this vase, you know," she said. "Like what?" "Like being brave enough to admit your mistakes and when someone chooses forgiveness over punishment." Then she handed him a notebook and said, "Write about today. Write it all down, and tomorrow we'll read it together." That was how Liam began journaling. The habit stayed with him, his way of holding on to his humanity amid cold negotiations and numbers. Back in the present, Liam sat up in bed, switched on the lamp, and unzipped the leather travel bag by his side. He pulled out a weathered, leather-bound journal, the one he'd carried with him since age 18. When he left the mansion after his parents' death, there was one page he had never dared reopen, a hastily written entry. The handwriting shaky. "Miss Clara's gone. They said she quit. But she wouldn't leave without saying goodbye, right? You said you'd stay until I didn't need you anymore, but I still need you." Liam gripped the journal tightly. Back then, he believed Clara had left of her own accord. No message, no note. The house had been cold, empty, and no one had offered him an explanation. In the grief of losing both parents, he quietly buried all his doubts beneath the most comforting assumption he could make. Clara had found a better place, but now he knew the truth was far more complicated. The next morning, Liam returned to the bookshop. Clara was watering small plants on the porch. She froze when she saw him then nodded, wordlessly inviting him inside. No tears, no accusations. Just silence between two people who once meant the world to each other. Liam sat down on the familiar upholstered chair. Clara poured tea, like she used to. No sugar and a thin slice of fresh ginger. "How long has it been?" he asked softly. 14 years. "Since the day they took you away from that house," she replied evenly. "Why didn't you reach out?" Clara looked out the window for a long moment, then finally said, "I wrote letters. Many, but no one would tell me where you were then. One day, people from your family came. They said I had completed my duty offered money to disappear quietly. They forced you." She nodded faintly. "I refused the money. But they erased me from everything. Your relatives, they were. Afraid I knew too much." Liam clenched his fists. Anger, pain, and guilt churned into a lump in his throat. In all his years building the empire his parents left behind, he had never realized that the one person who truly loved him had been cast out like an unwanted shadow. Clara gently placed her hand over his. Her eyes held no blame, only sorrow. "But you found me now. That's enough." Liam looked at her, shaking his head slowly. "No, Clara, I owe you an apology. And more than that, I owe you the truth." At the corner of the shop, Isabel stood half-hidden behind a bookshelf, gripping a journal. She couldn't hear everything, but her mother's eyes, for the first time in years, shimmered with tears. She didn't yet know who Liam Blackford truly was in her mother's past, but something deep inside told her. This man was about to stir everything she had ever thought was peaceful. Clara had no idea that Liam had spent the entire night awake after their conversation. He had returned to his hotel. But instead of opening his laptop like usual, he sat motionless by the window, staring at the faint lights of Elmridge. In the distance, Liam realized this was the first time in years his heart stirred, not because of a contract, a figure, or a prestigious award, but because of a memory, a person, and a past that had never been told truthfully. He had just turned 18 that morning. While at boarding school, Liam received a call from the family lawyer. "Your parents, they're gone." The plane crashed into the Pacific. There were no survivors. Liam couldn't recall exactly how he responded. Only that, after the call, a strange emptiness settled into his mind. No tears, no screams. Just an unbearable silence that stretched on and on. He was flown back to the main house in the Boston suburbs, where the Blackford family held a luxurious, somber, and private funeral, just like the lives Richard and Evelyn Blackford had lived. Clara wasn't there. He waited, searched for her among the familiar household staff, but no one mentioned her. No one dared. When he asked a butler, the reply was curt. "She no longer works here, sir. Nothing to worry about." Liam didn't understand, but amidst the chaos of mourning, legal meetings, and the calculating gazes of distant relatives, he had to bury his questions deep inside. A few weeks later, his uncle Frederick Blackford was appointed by the court as Liam's temporary guardian and trustee until he turned 21. A polished man, always smiling, always saying things in your best interest. Yet Liam had always felt more like an asset than a nephew. Frederick took Liam to press conferences, introduced him as the rightful heir, and announced plans for him to study abroad in the UK before returning to lead the company. Liam listened, nodded, and allowed himself to be swept along by fate's current. What he didn't know was that, right after Richard and Evelyn's deaths, Frederick had been the first to sign Clara Bell's dismissal. No explanation, no notice. Just a short letter. From HR, Ms. Bell. Your services are no longer required by the Blackford family. Your final payment is enclosed. You are instructed to have no further contact with Master Liam. Clara was stunned. She had once been trusted by the Blackfords, even entrusted with sensitive documents. She knew about Evelyn's handwritten will, how all the assets would go to Liam, and how Clara was to remain as his emotional guardian. But no one ever mentioned that will after the crash. No one referred to the letter. Evelyn had left inside a blue envelope carefully kept in Clara's drawer. Then, men came, offering money and a non-disclosure agreement. Clara tore the paper in front of them. And with that act, she was erased from the life of the boy she had once loved like her own. Erased from records, her stipend. Frozen Dot threatened with legal action if she dared approach the air again. No home. No job. No name, only Isabel. And a fragile hope that one day Liam would remember her. Clara told Liam everything when he returned to the bookstore on the third day. They sat at the table near the window, where soft morning light poured in. Isabel busied herself stacking books in the back, though her eyes often drifted toward them. "Why did they have to get rid of you?" Liam asked, his voice breaking. Clara looked at him, her eyes not angry, only tired. "Because I knew too much. And because they were afraid you'd come looking for me. You still have the will?" he asked. Clara nodded and stood, disappearing. Into the storage room behind the shop. A few minutes later, she returned and placed an aged envelope on the table, sealed with red wax. "In case of emergency, I leave this letter with Clara Bell. Trust her as you would trust me." Evelyn Blackford. Liam brushed his fingers lightly over the envelope. His heart pounded. Memory, rage, shame, gratitude all tangled within his chest. He looked at Clara, his voice hoarse. "They buried you, and I let it happen." Clara smiled gently and placed her hand over his. "But you're here now, and that can change everything." From behind the shelves, Isabel stood clutching a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, a book she'd loved since childhood. She had never seen her mother like this, eyes glistening, voice unsteady, hands trembling as she placed the envelope on the table. She didn't know what was unfolding, but one thing had become clear. This man named Liam wasn't just a passing visitor, and for the first time in her orderly life, something inside Isabel began to shift. Isabel Bell had never believed in coincidences. As the daughter of a woman who had once been dismissed without warning, who had worked every odd job to raise her and build a modest bookshop in town, Isabel had learned one thing: everything happens for a reason, and everyone has an agenda. So when that man Liam Blackford suddenly appeared, she was on guard. When she saw her mother tremble as if she'd seen a ghost, she grew suspicious. And when she watched the two of them whispering like they shared a history she had never been told, Isabel felt as though someone had quietly stirred up the peaceful home she and her mother had spent years building. That afternoon, after the bookshop had closed, Isabel sat at the tea counter, stirring a cup of oolong. Her eyes, however, stayed fixed on the window. Her mother was sitting on the porch with Liam. They spoke softly, gently, yet their expressions were heavy, marked by a blend of regret and reverence. She heard her mother laugh, just a small chuckle, but one that struck deep. When was the last time her mother had laughed like that? Since opening the shop, their lives had been simple. Mornings opening the doors, afternoons with customers, evenings reading books. Isabel had never seen her mother open up to anyone this way. Even when old friends dropped by, Clara always kept a polite, measured distance, kind, but never too close. And yet now, a man sat there not as a stranger, but as though he had once belonged. Isabel stepped out onto the porch, her voice steady. "Mom, I'm thinking of reheating the cinnamon waffles. Want some?" Clara turned with a faint smile. "Of course. And bring another cup of tea for Liam, please." Isabel nodded and let her eyes drift toward the man beside her mother. His gaze met hers. It wasn't the distant look he'd worn the first time they met. It was direct, slow, and carried something like guilt. "Miss Isabel, thank you for tolerating my presence these past few days," Liam said quietly. Isabel raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall inviting you." Clara gently interjected Isabel, but Liam simply smiled. He understood. I deserve the suspicion, and I don't blame you. He stood, bowing slightly to Clara. I'll come back when you're free. And about the other matter, if I can. Find the original. I'll bring it. Clara nodded, her gaze warm with trust. Isabel watched him leave through the shop's front gate, then turned to her mother. How long have you known him? Clara was quiet for a moment before answering. Since before you were born. Who is he? He's the boy I once cared for, as if he were my own. Isabel fell silent. Some part of her understood now the strange bond between her mother and the man. But another part, her protective instinct, kept whispering, be careful. Don't let your heart be fooled. That night, in her room, Isabel flipped through the shop's sales log. Liam Blackford, the name was too prominent not to look into. She picked up her phone and quickly typed. Photos filled the screen. Sharp suits. Striking features. A cold and calculating gaze in press conferences. CEO of one of the largest private healthcare conglomerates in the USA&D now. That same man had been sipping tea in her bookstore. Speaking with her mother-like family, she set the phone down and exhaled deeply. She didn't hate him, but she didn't like the feeling of jealousy. Jealousy over his past with her mother. Jealousy that her mother had once loved another child so much that just seeing him again after 14 years made her tremble. The next day, when Liam returned, Isabel was neither cold nor warm. She was simply silent. She handed him a cup of tea. No greeting, no question. Liam understood. And he didn't try to push through the wall. He simply took his usual seat. Working quietly with Clara to review old notes and papers Evelyn Blackford had once entrusted to her. There were handwritten letters, property sketches, and instructions that had never been officially acknowledged. Meanwhile, Isabel observed them from a distance. No one noticed how intently she watched, and in that quiet distance something began to sprout, not trust, not feelings, but the first flicker of acceptance that this man might not leave their lives anytime soon. Liam never imagined returning to Boston with an old envelope in his coat pocket and a weight pressing on his heart. The Blackford Legacy Tower headquarters of the empire stood tall in the financial district, where everything ran on rules, capital, and reputation. But today, he wasn't here for investors or board meetings. He had come to unearth a promise long buried. The copy of the will Clara gave him held no legal weight. It was a handwritten note, never officially notarized. But what Liam couldn't ignore was the signature. And the voice in those words, it was undeniably his mother's. If anything happens, trust Clara. She knows what's best for you. Evelyn Blackford. He had to find the original. Only one man would know where it was, Frederick, his uncle, still holding a seat on the board. And once Liam's guardian for 3 years after the crash. Liam didn't announce his visit. He walked into Frederick's office, eyes steady. I need to speak with you about the will. Frederick paused mid-pour as he was making tea. What will? He asked evenly. The one my mother wrote by hand, the one that was never made public. Frederick chuckled lightly and set the teapot down. Liam, your parents drafted dozens of versions over the years. What's legal has already been declared. You're the heir. What's the issue? But the version I found mentioned Clara Bellhowe. She was to remain with our family. And clauses that were never acknowledged in court. A shadow flickered across Frederick's face. Clara Bell. You still remember that woman? She was just a nanny, Liam. Don't let sentiment cloud your judgment. Oh, no. She was the one who raised me when my parents weren't there. The one who held on to my humanity in that house. And the one who was dismissed without warning because someone feared she knew too much. For the first time in years, 2 Blackford men stood face to face, not as uncle and nephew, but as 2 people defending different versions of the truth. If you won't help me, "I'll find it myself," Liam said. "You're disrespecting your own family." "No, Uncle. I'm trying to salvage what's left of it." Liam went straight to the company's archive, vault home to hundreds of digitized and encrypted documents. He combed through asset files, ownership charts, and internal folders marked confidential. After more than 3 hours, he found a file buried deep in an outdated directory. It was stamped by a small, independent law firm, not the Blackford Group's official legal counsel. The folder was titled E. Blackford Last Revision. Not notarized inside were a handwritten will in his mother's distinctive slanted script, a personal letter addressed to him, reading, "If you're reading this, it means I wasn't able to protect you to the end, but Clara will. Trust her as you trusted me." Liam felt like something had clenched around his chest. He clutched the folder and stepped out of the vault, his mind spinning with a storm of rage and gratitude. The next day, he returned to Elm Ridge. Wind on the page was as quiet as ever, but this time it was Isabel who opened the door. She froze for a second when she saw him standing on the porch, his coat dusty, eyes tired and shadowed from lack of sleep. "Are you okay?" she asked. Liam gave a faint smile and shook his head. "I'm not sure. My mom's in the back garden." He nodded, but before leaving, he turned back to her. "Could you come outside for a minute? There's something I'd like to say." Isabel hesitated, then gave a small nod. They sat together on the wooden bench beside the lavender bed. A gentle breeze stirred the air. The scent of old books and lingering tea clung softly around them. "I'm sorry for making you uncomfortable," Liam began. "It's all right. I just wasn't prepared." "Neither was I," he admitted with a wry smile. "I've never had to search for someone who disappeared from my life 14 years ago. And I've never tried to explain to a stranger how deeply I was once loved." Isabel said nothing, but her expression softened. "My mother never talked much about you," she said, "but I know she was hurt. I made a mistake thinking silence was normal. I buried myself in work, in titles, in deals, and forgot there was someone who once held my hand through every nightmare. Someone who chose not to take a payoff just to preserve a child's trust." Isabel looked at him and, for the first time, saw the man behind the cold, polished CEO image. "Did you find what you were looking for?" "I did, and more than I expected." He pulled a photocopy of the will from his coat pocket. "I'm going to make it public. Even if it holds no legal power, the world deserves to know that someone like Clara Bell cannot be erased like an object." Isabel tightened her fingers slightly. She didn't know when it happened, but she no longer saw him as a threat. She saw him as part of something right, something slowly returning to where it belonged. When Clara stepped outside and saw them sitting together, she paused, then smiled. "Liam, you came back." He stood and handed her the will with both hands. "You won't be shut out again. This time, I promise." Clara took the paper, her hands trembling. Some promises don't need to be spoken, as long as someone keeps them to the very end. And, for the first time in years, the three of them, Clara, Liam, and Isabel, sat together like the remnants of a family the world had tried again and again to tear apart. Asterisk 3 days later. The name Liam Blackford unexpectedly appeared on the front pages of major newspapers. Not for a new acquisition, not for executive shakeups or product launches, but for a shocking move. Liam had officially filed a motion to reopen and re-examine the legality of a handwritten will left by his mother, Evelyn Blackford, that had been buried for 14 years. And in the same court filing, he requested an independent investigation into the unlawful dismissal of one of the family's closest former employees, Mrs. Clara Bell. The media exploded. The Blackford Group's board of directors was thrown into chaos. Frederick, his uncle, immediately called a closed-door meeting to question Liam. "Why stir up an old story no one wants to relive?" he asked. Liam's answer was brief, because justice doesn't expire. Back in Elmridge, the little bookstore was no longer as peaceful as before. A few journalists had started to show up. Clara refused interviews, saying only one thing: "I don't want to be the center of attention. I just want the truth to be heard, not distorted." Isabel was overwhelmed. She had no idea how to handle the situation. Part of her wanted to protect her mother, but the other part couldn't help wondering, had she been wrong about Liam all along? That afternoon, as Liam arrived at the store, Isabel was standing on a tall step stool, organizing the British literature section. "Careful, that shelf's a bit loose," he said gently. "I know," she replied, without turning around. But no sooner had she spoken than the stool shifted. A book slipped, and Isabel lost her balance. "Isabel." Liam rushed forward just in time to catch her. She landed squarely in his arms, breath short. Eyes wide, one hand still clutching Wuthering Heights like a life raft. I'm fine," she stammered. "I'm not so sure," he said softly, still holding her. She flushed, then gently pushed against his shoulder. "Do you always like playing the hero?" "No," he replied, "but for you it might be the first time I've ever." "Wanted to try?" Isabel said nothing. Not because she didn't have words, but because she didn't want to ruin the moment. That evening, Clara invited them both to sit down for dinner. She had made vegetable soup and garlic butter toast, a simple meal. Warm and familiar, like the ones she used to make for Liam when he was a boy. "You two are just like Richard and Evelyn when they were young," she said softly, eyes glinting with a quiet memory. "They used to look at each other like that, with the kind of eyes that had no idea what they were stepping into, but couldn't look away." Liam chuckled. Isabel blushed. "You're exaggerating," she mumbled. "I'm not," Clara smiled. "I'm just older. I see things more clearly." Dinner ended in quiet laughter, with none of the tension that had haunted previous days. After the dishes were done, Isabel stepped into the garden to water the plants. Liam followed. The breeze was light. A warm yellow glow spilled from the porch light. The scent of lavender drifted lazily through the air. "I didn't think things would go this far," Ski said, using a softer, more familiar tone. Liam stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "Me neither, a tea, but I've never felt more certain than I do now." Isabel looked at him, her gaze probing. "You're not scared? Of the media, of the board, of Frederick?" "I am," he admitted. "But the only thing that made me stop being afraid was seeing your mother smile again. And realizing you no longer look at me like I'm a stranger." Silence, long enough that only the wind and crickets filled the space between them. Isabel set down the watering can. "So if this ends, if Frederick is exposed, if my mother is cleared, what then?" Liam looked at her. Under the golden light, her eyes shimmered like still water. "Then I'll stay. If you'll let me." Isabel didn't answer, but the faintest, smallest nod from her barely there was more than enough. That night, Liam returned to his hotel carrying something no document he'd ever signed could give him. A feeling he couldn't name. Not triumph. Not the success of a well-executed plan, but the quiet, overwhelming warmth of being trusted by the daughter of the woman who once taught him how to be human. That morning, Liam stood in a navy suit before the Blackford Legacy Tower. As if he were the one who had found it, had not Richard, not Frederick, but had transformed Liam Blackford. Reborn after 14 years, behind the tower was a special boardroom used for handling the company's sensitive internal matters. Today, Liam had summoned the meeting himself. He placed the handwritten will on the long wooden table, his eyes scanning the familiar faces, people who once smiled and shook hands with him, now shifting nervously like pawns before a king about to declare checkmate. "This is my mother Evelyn Blackford's final handwriting," Liam began, voice steady. In it, She designates Mrs. Clara Bell to remain as my personal advisor till I turn 25. This will was never made public. Frederick raised an eyebrow, smirking. And you're bringing an unsigned letter into this boardroom too? Challenge the company's legal foundation. I'm not here to challenge it, Uncle, Liam replied. I'm here to save it. The room fell silent. Liam continued. I've matched the handwriting, located the original in our digital archives. And I also discovered a strange transaction made 2 weeks after my parents died. He clicked the remote. The screen lit up. A $75,000 wire transfer to an account under the name Harper Consulting, listed to Clara Bell. This is the support payment you referred to during last year's inquiry. Frederick sat upright, silent. What's the issue here? One board member asked. Liam answered, his gaze fixed on his uncle. The issue is, Clara Bell never had that account. She never received any such payment. I've worked with the bank. The signature on the withdrawal is forged. A small gasp echoed in the room. Tension coiled like a wire pulled tight. Furthermore, Liam continued, the account was opened by Frederick's former assistant, the one who retired last year and is now cooperating with federal investigators. Frederick slammed a hand on the table. What are you trying to do, Liam? I'm reclaiming the dignity of a woman our family betrayed. Liam stepped forward. You didn't just erase Clara from my life. You forged a payout to silence her and then used it to claim she agreed to stay quiet. That's enough. Frederick stood up, voice sharp. No, Uncle. This is just the beginning. Liam said coldly. He turned to the board. I formally request a suspension of Mr. Frederick Blackford's managerial privileges until this investigation concludes. And I propose this will be made public as part of the unprocessed estate documents. No one objected. No one dared. That afternoon, Liam returned to Elm Ridge. He entered the bookstore without knocking, as though the place no longer felt like a stranger's home. Clara was arranging dried flowers in a ceramic vase. Isabel was organizing shelves in the back. I found it, Liam said. Setting the folder on the table, Clara looked at the documents, asked nothing. She knew. They tried to fabricate a story that you took hush money. They faked a signature. Created a phantom account, Liam said, voice hoarse. Eyes rimmed red dot. Clara didn't look surprised. I've suspected it for years. But suspecting is different from hearing it from you. I'll bring it all into the light. You don't have to do this for me. I'm not doing it for you. Liam shook his head. I'm doing it because your kindness doesn't deserve to be buried beneath their greed and manipulation. There was a pause. Isabel stepped closer, eyeing the folder. She had never seen Liam look so vulnerable, and she had never seen her mother smile with such calm and pride. So what happens now? Isabel asked. Liam turned to her. She blinked. You're the one thing I can't investigate, can't predict, and definitely can't ignore. She laughed, shaking her head. I'm a living bookstore. I'm not as easy to read as you think. Then I'll read one page at a time, and if it has no ending. Liam smiled. Then I'll be content, living in the margins every single day. Clara turned away, hiding a knowing smile. She saw it clearly now. The boy she once held in her arms, a lost child with too many questions, had finally found his real family. Not on paper, but in the heart. The news spread faster than any media campaign Liam had ever orchestrated. Headlines exploded across national outlets. Blackford Group faces forgery allegations. Hidden will reveals true emotional heir Nanny. Expelled from billionaire circle, vindicated after 14 years, young CEO breaks silence. Seeks justice for the woman who raised him, Clara Bell, once erased from the elite like a fading shadow, now stood at a press conference. No grandeur, no designer dresses. Just a worn wool coat, her hair in a loose bun and eyes that had seen too much, yet still held calm. "I don't want to be a symbol," she said, voice steady. "I just want every child to grow up with someone who stays not the richest person, just someone who doesn't leave when everyone else does. No tears, no blame, only a quiet dignity that somehow thundered louder than outrage." Liam stood beside her, saying nothing. He knew this was Clara's day. And as she once told him, his only promise was to listen and never forget. The next day, Liam didn't go to work. He turned off his phone, handed responsibilities to the interim deputy. Instead, he drove to Elmridge as a CEO, not with documents, not with guilt, but with one honest wish: to spend time with Isabel. The bookstore was closed early. Isabel greeted him in a pale olive knit dress, holding a journal, her hair grazing her shoulders. No polite greetings. No guarded questions. "Can we go somewhere without any words?" she asked with a soft smile. "After 3 months of reading legal documents." "Absolutely," Liam chuckled. They drove beyond town, through fields bathed in golden light, and stopped beside a quiet lake. There were no memories here, only the present. They sat on the grass, eating sandwiches Isabel had packed, sipping tea from an old thermos. "My mom said you used to be afraid of the dark," Isabel began. "She's right," Liam nodded. "I kept a nightlight until I was 12. My mom didn't know, or maybe she knew and didn't care. Clara. She gave me a flashlight and said, 'If you're afraid, then make it your friend.'" Isabel stayed quiet, then whispered, "I used to be afraid of silence, because it often came with pain. So if I don't say anything right now, would that hurt you?" he asked. She smiled. "No, because for the first time, this silence comes with someone beside me." They sat there for a long time. No need to rush. No need to prove anything. Isabel tilted her head toward the lake, glowing orange under the setting sun. "I used to think you came here to make amends." "At first I did," Liam admitted. "But then I realized some things don't have names, like how I miss you when I don't see you at the shop, or how you somehow make everything around you quieter." She didn't look at him, but her shoulders trembled slightly. "I also used to think if my mom got hurt again, I'd never forgive you. And now? Now I think if she trusts you, maybe I should try." Liam smiled and held out his hand. Isabel hesitated, then placed hers gently in his. No tight grip, no promises, just two people choosing to sit beside each other at sunset. That night, before he left, Liam asked, "Tomorrow, can I take your mom to buy something?" "What?" "A new sign. For the bookstore. You're changing the name." Isabel raised an eyebrow. "Not exactly. Just adding a line." The next morning, the wooden sign whined on the page bore a new handwritten line beneath it, in Liam's script, where no one is forgotten. Clara said nothing when she saw it, but she stood at the doorway for a long time, fingertips tracing the words as if touching something sacred. Isabel stood behind her, leaning against the frame. And Liam? Still himself, but no longer a man searching for someone lost. Now, he was simply someone who chose to stay. 1 week after the Frederick scandal broke and the Blackford Group's board underwent complete restructuring, Liam was officially invited to resume the CEO position with full authority. The executive office door stood open, waiting, but he didn't step inside, not right away. That morning, Liam stood on the top floor of the tower where his parents once held private meetings and made industry-shaping decisions in private healthcare. The glass walls reflected a city pulsing with energy, where people walked fast, spoke louder, and lived as if tomorrow didn't exist. But in Elmridge, things were different. Clara still woke early to make breakfast. Isabel still checked each book like tending to a garden of words. and Liam had never felt he belonged anywhere as much as when sitting at the tea table in that bookstore. Watching the quiet smiles of two women who had never demanded anything but his presence, he opened his laptop. The screen lit up, rows of unread emails flooding in. One stood out from the company's PR team, Mr. Blackford. If you return as CEO, we can launch a rebranding campaign that leverages the Clara Bell case. This is the perfect moment to solidify your personal brand. Liam exhaled slowly. Personal brand. He'd lived by that phrase for a decade, but he had never once lived for himself. He opened a blank message and typed. Only one line. I decline the CEO position. Please appoint someone who leads with values, not just margins. I'll continue supporting the company from a different place. He signed his name and hit send. That afternoon, Liam returned to Elmridge, but this time he didn't come alone. He brought a small wooden box. Inside were the legal documents of a newly established organization, the Clara Bell Foundation, for the ones who were forgotten. When Clara opened the box, she couldn't speak for several moments. Her fingers trembled as they touched the seal, bearing her name. This is, she asked, a place where no one can erase you again. Liam said quietly, here, you get to be chosen again. Liam, you don't have to lead it, but you'll be its light. You're the reason it exists. Isabel stood behind them, eyes glistening. That evening, they shared dinner together. No crystal chandeliers, no silk napkins. Just an old wooden table, foggy glass cups, and laughter that felt real. After dinner, Isabel stepped onto the porch, holding a book. Liam followed. You're not going back to the city, she asked. No, he replied. I've already made my choice. And what if everything falls apart tomorrow? What if the company spirals without you? They'll recover. But if I miss this, I'm not sure what I'd have left to hold on to. She turned to him. You mean my mom, not just your mom? He looked at her, steady and sincere. I mean you, Isabel. Silence. Then she whispered, I don't know where to begin. I've never loved someone who brought an entire world with them. Then let me begin, Liam said, taking her hand this time without hesitation. Maybe by walking you down that lavender path every afternoon. And then, if you don't get tired of me, I'll invite you to read in the new Clara Bell Foundation office. I'll even keep a shelf just for the books you pick. She laughed, nodding. Then I'll choose a book every day. But you have to make the tea. Deal, Liam smiled, holding her hand tighter. A breeze stirred the porch curtains, soft and unhurried. In the fading light, they stood side by side, not CEO and Nanny's daughter. Not divided by wealth or a lost childhood. Just a man once lost, who'd found his way home in a small bookstore, and a woman who, for the first time, realized she didn't have to earn love to deserve it. Asterisk on a crisp autumn morning. As golden leaves began to scatter along the winding paths of Elmridge, a soft, cream-colored banner appeared in front of Wind on the Page bookstore. In delicate, handwritten script, it read, Grand opening of the Clara Bell Community Center, where those once forgotten will finally be heard. There were no flashing cameras, no designer gowns or overblown speeches, just a small crowd, mostly townspeople, a few elderly residents who lived alone, some orphaned children receiving support, and volunteers in T-shirts embroidered with the words, Belonging begins here. Clara sat in the front row, wrapped in her familiar smoky gray cardigan, her eyes shining not from stage lights, but from the quiet gratitude of those who, like her, had once been overlooked. Isabel stood beside Liam, hand in hand, her smile shy but warm, as Clara stepped up to cut the ribbon. The entire space fell silent. Liam handed her a special pair of Scissor's Eats wooden handles, carved from the original bookshelf of the old store. Clara held it tightly just for a moment. "Today, we're not just opening a building," she said, her voice trembling softly. "We're opening a chance for people to be seen. I was once forgotten, but now someone walks through these doors. They'll know no one is left behind if even one heart still remembers them." As the scissors clicked and the silk ribbon fell, the garden behind the center seemed to glow. Children clapped, an old woman wept, and Liam stood still for a long time, watching the woman he once thought he'd lost forever become a living symbol of compassion. The center was divided into 3 spaces: a reading and bibliotherapy room, curated by Isabel, a support hub for those unemployed or marginalized, run by volunteers; Clara's room, a quiet space where anyone could come and simply be listened to. No appointment, no paperwork. And Liam, after officially stepping down from the Blackford Group board, dedicated his days to fundraising, operations, and learning how to live more slowly. He learned to brew tea the way Isabel liked, light, with a slice of dried orange. He read books more slowly, not scanning like a contract, but absorbing every emotion. And he learned how to be still when Isabel rested her head on his shoulder, without asking anything, long enough for her to know she didn't have to be strong all the time. One evening, after the center closed, the 3 of them sat together in the garden. The breeze was cool. Lanterns hung loosely above, casting a soft glow across their hair. Isabel had just poured tea when Clara gently said, "Liam, did you know Evelyn worried about you, even more than she let on?" "I thought she was too busy to worry," he replied. "No, she was afraid you'd grow up not knowing where your home truly was." Liam stared into his steaming cup. "She was right," he said quietly. "But now I think I've found it." He turned to Isabel, taking her hand. "I don't know if love has a proper definition, but if it's what makes me want to wake up early just to reread a page you've picked, or makes me stay in a town with no skyscrapers, then I think I'm in love with you." Isabel smiled, softly, like hearing a melody she'd known forever. "I know," she said, "and I don't plan on letting you go." Clara turned away, pretending to study the treetops, but her eyes had already begun to mist. The story didn't end with a wedding. There was no grand proposal, no sweeping vows. Just the next morning, Liam brought waffles to the bookstore. Isabel tossed him a novel and said, "Read this. There's a part that sounds just like us." And Liam nodded, dead serious, as if she'd handed him a multi-million-dollar investment file. On the back wall of the store, small plaque was hung. "Legacy isn't money, it's how you make someone feel like they've never been invisible." LB the end. The story of Liam, Clara, and Isabel reminds us family doesn't always come from blood. Love doesn't always begin with a vow, and those who were once left behind always deserve to be remembered with a full heart. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of today's story. Perhaps the most beautiful thing Liam found wasn't justice, wasn't success, but a family he thought he had lost, a mother who didn't give birth to him, yet never forgot he meant a love so gentle, so sincere, that it made him choose to stain out of duty. But because of the heart, this story reminds us no one is ever too small to be forgotten, and it's never too late to begin again as long as you're willing to return, to say sorry, and to love once more. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below, because maybe we're not as alone as we once thought. And don't forget to subscribe to Snail's Story, so each week you'll find a little warmth again, like a quiet light on a windy day. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of today's story. Perhaps the most beautiful thing Liam found wasn't justice, wasn't success, but a family he thought he had lost, a mother who didn't give birth to him, yet never forgot him, and a love so gentle, so sincere, that it made him choose to stain out of duty. But because of the heart, this story reminds us no one is ever too small to be forgotten. And it's never too late to begin again as long as you're willing to return, to say sorry, and to love once more. If this story touched something in you, leave a comment below because maybe we're not as alone as we once thought. And don't forget to subscribe to Snail Story, so each week you'll find a little warmth again like a quiet light on a windy day.